What we are told, don't do, don't look, don't want. Why is it that, so often, this is precisely what most awakens our curiosity, our interest, and yes, our desire? That apparent special flavor of the fruit that is denied to us. Where does it really come from? Welcome to Beyond the Unconscious. Today our conversation will explore one of the most intriguing aspects of the human experience. Forbidden desires. Why do they attract us so much? If you have ever felt divided between what is allowed and that impulse that pulls to the limit, this video will offer important keys to understanding this attraction and its roots in our inner world. Prepare to look at the forbidden in a different way. Before we closely examine the psychic roots of this peculiar attraction to what is forbidden to us, it is worth recognizing how ancient this dynamic is, how present it is, and repeats itself in our culture and in our lives. The idea of the forbidden fruit is by no means a modern invention or a particularity of some. It is felt in countless narratives that traverse the history of humanity. Let's think about it a little. From the most fundamental myths we know, such as the well-known story of Adam and Eve in paradise and the apple that should not have been eaten, or Pandora's fatal curiosity before the box she was entrusted not to open, to great works of literature and cinema, the attraction to what is forbidden is a central and recurring theme. These are stories that tell us of characters who, precisely because of a prohibition, an imposed limit, feel an even greater impulse, an irresistible curiosity towards what has been denied to them. It seems that the prohibition itself has the power to light a flame, and we don't have to go that far, looking only at great narratives. In our simplest daily lives, we can observe this same force in action. The small child who, with shining eyes, feels irresistibly attracted to that object that the parents have just said, don't touch that. The almost magnetic fascination that secrets and mysteries exert on us. From childhood to adulthood, the interest that often arises spontaneously for information, places or experiences that are restricted to us or difficult to access. These are small but significant samples of how the not allowed can become especially interesting and desirable for us. This shows us quite clearly that the attraction to the forbidden is not in itself a deviation of character or a moral failure that would only affect some individuals. On the contrary, this dynamic seems to be a deeply human characteristic, an almost expected response to a limit that is imposed on us. But why does this happen? What does psychoanalysis have to tell us about this intriguing facet of our desire? Psychoanalysis, since its origins with the pioneering works of Sigmund Freud, offers a particular and very rich look at this complex issue of desire for what is forbidden. And the first fundamental point of this perspective is that it seeks to go beyond a simple moral judgment about this attraction. For psychoanalysis, it is not about classifying this attraction as right or wrong, good or bad in itself, as a purely external code of conduct would. Instead of condemning or simply justifying this human tendency, psychoanalysis proposes a deeper task: to understand. What are the psychic roots of this persistent attraction? Why does the human being, so consistently, seem to feel especially instigated by what is forbidden to him, by what carries the mark of interdiction? The answer is not on the surface, in simple stubbornness or a supposed weakness of will, but in the complex dynamics of our constitution as desiring subjects. For Freud, the relationship between desire, the law that limits and organizes it, and the ever-present possibility of transgression is not an accidental detail of psychic life, but one of the central axes in the formation of our psyche. It is in this complex game between what we want, what we are allowed, and what we are forbidden that our identity as subjects who desire is formed. The forbidden, therefore, is not just an external obstacle to desire. It actively participates in its own creation and, paradoxically, in its intensity. Understanding this intricate dynamic is crucial for those who seek to know themselves more deeply and deal more consciously with their own impulses and with the limits that life imposes on us. It is an invitation to think about how interdiction can, in a surprising way, end up feeding what it itself tries to contain. Let's investigate this more closely. We have seen how the attraction to the forbidden is a human characteristic, and how psychoanalysis seeks to understand it beyond a simple moral judgment. But how exactly can a prohibition end up stirring up our desire instead of simply extinguishing it? It is here that Sigmund Freud's reflections become especially enlightening and offer us a new perspective. Freud realized that the law, the interdiction, by naming something as quote 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 exity quote 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 a special status. Something before the prohibition, perhaps that object or that action was just one more among so many possibilities. But from the moment when a voice of authority says, "This cannot be," what has been forbidden gains a prominence, a singularity that it did not possess before. It is as if, when we are told, "Don't think of the pink elephant," the image of the pink elephant becomes almost impossible to erase from our minds. The prohibition, in this sense, not only represses, it can also illuminate the forbidden object, making it more visible and intensifying our desire for it. If the prohibition can highlight the object and intensify the desire, there is also another crucial element in this dynamic: the transgression itself. The act of crossing the demarcated line can become, in itself, a source of particular excitement. It is not just about obtaining the forbidden object, but about the feeling that the challenge to the limit itself provides us. For psychoanalysis, this excitement linked to transgression can have deep roots. It may be connected to an unconscious desire to challenge authority, whether external or the internalized authority that constitutes our superego. Breaking a rule can be a way of affirming one's own strength or autonomy. In these cases, the flavor of the forbidden would not come only from the conquest of the object itself, but from the very adventure of circumventing the vigilance, of experiencing the risk, of feeling the adrenaline of doing something that should not be done. It is as if the very act of prohibiting the prohibition, of saying no to the law, contained a spark of pleasure, an affirmation of power, even if momentary, and often followed by guilt. We talked about the superego as this instance that internalizes the law and the prohibitions. We could think that a strong superego would simply distance us from forbidden desires. But the relationship is much more complex, and at times, ambiguous. An excessively rigid and punitive superego can, paradoxically, end up feeding even more the attraction to the forbidden. How does this happen? A superego that imposes rules very severely, that constantly criticizes and punishes, can generate such great internal pressure that the desire for the forbidden arises as an unconscious rebellion. It is a desperate attempt to find a valve of escape, a breath, even if this implies more guilt and punishment later. It is the logic of, since I am guilty anyway. In some cases, there may even be a masochistic search for the punishment that the transgression would attract, as a way to alleviate an even older unconscious guilt. The dynamic between our ideal ego, what we aspire to be, and the impulses that contradict it, also plays a role here. The forbidden can be a way to confront this ideal, or to express the frustration of not achieving it. We have already seen how the law itself, and our internal moral instance, the superego, can play an unexpected role in making the forbidden more attractive. But psychoanalysis invites us to go even deeper, to investigate the true unconscious configurations that manifest themselves behind this fascination. What else is at stake when the cannot becomes so seductive? One of the keys is in our oldest history. In childhood, we all experienced intense desires that, for different reasons, were considered forbidden and needed to be repressed. Let us think, for example, of the complexity of the feelings and desires that arise in the context of the Oedipus complex, where love and hate unite in relation to parental figures, and where the child is faced with fundamental interdictions. These childhood desires, when intensely forbidden and not elaborated, do not disappear. They remain active in the unconscious and can seek, throughout adult life, ways to manifest themselves. The attraction to objects, people, or situations that carry the mark of the forbidden can be, then, a form of repetition. It is an unconscious attempt to stage that original scenario again, perhaps in the hope of, this time, obtaining a different satisfaction, or of finally elaborating that old conflict. The forbidden object of today may be a reflection of that first great no. Another crucial element to understand the seduction of the forbidden is the immense power of our inner life, of our ability to fantasize. Fantasy is not just an inconsequential daydream. For psychoanalysis, it is a true psychic stage, a fundamental space where our desires, especially the most secret ones, can be staged and intensified. When a desire is marked by prohibition, fantasy can become the privileged place where limits are tested, where transgression is lived in thought, with all the charge of excitement that this can bring. It is in fantasy that we can imagine the most daring scenarios, the most dramatic consequences, the most intense pleasure of what, in reality, perhaps we would never dare to seek. This mental rehearsal can, in itself, be extremely exciting. Fantasy, in this sense, not only reflects the desire for the forbidden, it actively constructs and feeds it. It can season the forbidden object or situation with an aura of mystery, of danger, of adventure, making them even more irresistible to our unconscious. What we imagine about the forbidden is often more potent than the forbidden itself, and it is fantasy that gives this potency. And we arrive at one of the most intriguing combinations of our psychic life: the complex and often ambiguous dance between guilt, excitement, and attraction to danger. When we feel attracted to a forbidden desire, it is common that, along with the desiring impulse, there also arises the anticipation of guilt, or the feeling of guilt itself for wanting something wrong. Paradoxically, for some people and in certain unconscious dynamics, this guilt itself, or the tension that it generates, can end up increasing the excitement. It is as if the imminence of punishment, or the feeling of doing something risky, added a special flavor to the desire, making it even more vibrant. This search for the butterflies in the stomach that the forbidden can offer, this mixture of fear, guilt, and excitement, can become a vicious cycle. The transgression generates guilt, the guilt asks for punishment, or more transgression to justify the guilt, and the excitement of the danger feeds the desire. It is a complex dynamic where suffering and a particular type of pleasure meet in a way that can be difficult to untangle, trapping the subject in painful repetitions. We explored the unconscious configurations that pull us to the forbidden. Faced with this, are we doomed to be playthings of this dynamic, or can we build a more conscious relationship with these desires? Psychoanalysis suggests yes. The first step is to recognize this attraction in us, without easy moralisms, to admit that it exists and has an internal logic, beyond the simple lack of shame or weakness. Once the attraction is recognized, we can question the prohibition. Where does this rule that makes such a desire forbidden for me come from? Is it a concrete external law, vital for coexistence? Or would it be a reflection of an old family norm, a severe mandate of my superego, that today perhaps no longer finds so much practical meaning in my adult life? Discerning the origin of the interdiction is a liberating step for our consciousness. In parallel, it is crucial to investigate what this specific desire for the forbidden really seeks, beyond the simple emotion of transgression. Will there be behind this impulse a deeper and perhaps legitimate need that is not finding other channels of expression? Could it be a longing for more freedom, for recognition, for vivacity, or even an unconscious attempt to repair an old emotional wound? The forbidden is often just the packaging of something much more meaningful for our soul. These important questions pave the way for a third essential movement: the differentiation between psychic elaboration and the simple impulsive acting out of desire. It is essential that we create an internal space, and, when necessary, a safe therapeutic space such as that of analysis, so that we can think about these desires. It is necessary to reflect on their complex origins in our history, on the fantasies that accompany them, and on the fears that they can also awaken. Instead of just acting impulsively in the direction of transgression, which often imprisons us in repetitive cycles of excitement followed by guilt, or of repressing these desires with even more force, which generates suffering, the proposal is to seek meanings. It is to try to understand what this attraction to the forbidden tells us about ourselves, so that we can then find more conscious paths for our desiring energy. Our exploration today of the intense fascination that the forbidden can exert on us has revealed a universe of complex and, at times, surprising internal dynamics. We have seen how the law itself, by imposing a limit, can paradoxically instigate desire, and how our superego, our most secret fantasies, and the marks of our childhood history are forming the complex configuration of this often irresistible attraction to what is denied to us. It is a constant invitation to look inward. Understanding these psychic mechanisms, however, is by no means an invitation to inconsequential transgression or to the simple satisfaction of all impulses. On the contrary, it is a door that opens to a more genuine and responsible freedom. The freedom to be more conscious of our impulses, to question more clearly the prohibitions that inhabit us, and to make choices that are truly aligned with who we really are, beyond the simple enchantment by the interdict. True autonomy is born from this knowledge of oneself. And you, throughout this conversation here on Beyond the Unconscious, have you ever found yourself intensely attracted to a forbidden desire in your life? How does today's reflection connect with your personal experience and with your own interrogations? Tell us here in the comments. Your sharing is always very welcome and enriches our learning community. If this content touched you, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear this. Until next time.